Well, welcome everyone to our meeting here of the Association for the Study of Middle East and Africa, ASMEA. My name is Robert Lloyd. I'm the Vice President of ASMEA, and it's my pleasure to invite you here to our luncheon. And we have a very special guest speaker today for this time. Thank you so much. And so I think we're in for a treat. The way we're going to do it, we have Gordon Gee, who's been president, I'll just say, of everywhere. And then we'll just leave it at that. We'll have a chance to get into more introductions in just a moment. And this is a special treat. We'll be able to have an individual who has a tremendous amount of experience in higher education. And the way we're going to do it is he and I will just have an interchange going back and forth, talking about some of the issues in higher education, I think, that are near and dear to all of us. And then after he and I interact for a little bit, you will have the opportunity to ask him some questions and interact with him as well. So we should wrap up in about a little less than an hour. So that's the game plan for the day. And so thank you for being here. And again, thank you for taking the time out to be a part of ASMEA. And I'm hoping you're enjoying all the panel discussions and that you're learning a lot and able to present. And thank you for your commitment to ASMEA and for your commitment to our field as well. So let's just jump right into it.
Is this working? Yes, it is working.
It is. And
there we go.
Mine's working too.
Great.
All right, I have my little cheat sheet here with lots of good questions. So this is an important conversation. I know some of you can't see me there on the other side of the podium, so I'll move back and forth. But this is an important conversation on the future of higher education. And I'm honored to welcome you as our distinguished guest, Dr. Gordon Gee. He has he's one of the most influential and longest serving presidents in American higher education. So you see him right here. Over the past 4 decades, he has led some of the nation's most prominent institutions, including Ohio State, Vanderbilt, Brown, and West Virginia University. And I believe West Virginia was 2 stints.
Yeah, and so was Ohio State, and then I was president of the University of Colorado also. I'm sorry.
University of Colorado. Did I leave out any other
no,
schools?
you left that out. Don't. Those Buffaloes will get mad at me otherwise.
So not only known for his leadership, obviously, of these institutions and his signature bow ties, but also for his deep commitment to the public mission of higher education. So I can think of no better person to have here before us to talk about issues of higher education than Dr. Gee. So most recently, you wrote a book, What's Public About Public Higher Education, co-authored with Stephen Gavazzi, and that's taking a look at the relationship between public universities and the communities they serve. So that topic is an important topic. I'd like to move a little bit beyond public universities and talk about higher education in general today. So let's before we do that, let's talk about the public universities. So what inspired you to write that book about, at this particular moment in time, about what's causing the growing rift between public universities and the citizens who fund them? Yeah. What do you see as the root cause of this disconnect?
I'll give you a quick anecdote. I became a university president in 1980, before most of you were born, I might add. And in fact, someone joked about the other day that my roommate was Abraham Lincoln, and probably so, although it wasn't, but I did attend his inauguration. But anyway, so over four and a half decades, I have really had a chance to have a window on higher education. And last year I was asked to speak, give the keynote address at the annual gathering of the Gallup organization in Omaha. And so in preparation for that, I just went back and took a look. In 1980, when I became a university president, the Gallup poll showed that about 90 to 95% of the American public thought that higher education was good. It was positive. When I spoke to Gallup, it was down to 36%. And so what that means is the fact that the American university, and I'm talking writ large, both the public and the private, have lost the trust of the American people. And I think that is one of the inspirations for the work that I've been doing, is really to try to figure out how do we rebuild trust as institutions? How do we reassert the fact that and we know this, I'm preaching to the converted here, that higher education in this country has been the economic, social, and cultural engine of this nation. But yet, for some reason or other, we have lost that sense of place and purpose, at least in the minds of the American public. So right now, we are struggling because of the fact that, and no matter what one thinks about the last election, and I won't talk about that politically, but what really happened in the last election, in my view, was not about Republicans and Democrats. It was about that a large swath of the American public said they were tired of being told how to think by the cultural elites or by the coastal elites, and they were going to reassert that they were going to tell universities what they wanted them to do rather than the other way around. So that really is where we are right now. I think we are in this rather interesting period. It's an existential period in many ways for higher education.
But that's sobering in the sense that all of us here, we work in higher education, and the implication is that a good swath of the American public doesn't trust those of us in this room.
Yeah, and if anything, it's even worse. I just saw a Pew poll, and it's now down about 30%. So in other words, we are not gaining much traction at this point, and I think I think what has happened, particularly since October 7th, when there was so much dissonance on university campuses, that really did create a whole set of issues for universities and how they were perceived by the public.
Okay, I'd like to come back to that in a little bit because
Sure.
that we need to unpack a little bit more because there's so much with that, and I think our audience would probably like to hear your thoughts more on October 7th and anti-Semitism and some of the issues surrounding that. But let's jump ahead because if the polls are showing increasing distrust towards American public institutions of higher education, both public and private, but at the same time, Americans want to send their children to higher education, and higher education is a backbone of American society. How do universities rebuild that trust? You talked about that in your book. So how do they rebuild it? How do the leaders rebuild the trust?
Well, it's not easy, but what we have to do is we have to return to the fundamental nature. Why do universities exist? We don't ask that question enough, and the reason we exist is for teaching and learning and for creating research that will be valued and worth and a variety of other things that really have to do with the intellectual capacity of universities. But in so many ways, we either have done a poor job of communicating that, and also we have not done a good job of really sticking to the primary roles of universities. We have become, in many ways, many universities have become political entities rather than significant places in which ideas and opportunities for discussion take place.
You've been in a number of different universities, both public and private.
I have.
And over 4 decades. So would you say that there's been a change over time? Because you talked about them being political, but by nature people are political. Yeah. Institutions are political. Has there been a change now from the time when you were going to school with Abraham Lincoln? You know, what's changed?
Yeah, well, so 1980 again, my starting point as university president. First of all, the way that students have dealt with universities has changed rather dramatically. I think, for example, between the millennial generation, which have left campuses recently, and the Z generation that's on campus, there is a real chasm in terms of the way that students view the world. Much different. For the first 2 or 3 generations, there was a difference, but it was not profound. It is now very profound. So, number one, universities need to think clearly about the way that we are training students and about what their expectations are. These are digital natives now, and they can immediately find out about what you're doing, respond to you. They can sully you if they want to. You know, social media is a very dramatic moment for anyone of us in a university leadership position for the universities themselves. And so I think what we have to do, in fact, I'll go back to Lincoln. You know, when 1862, when the Land Grant Act was passed, Abraham Lincoln, actually Justin Morrell came to see Lincoln, who was a farmer senator from Vermont, and indicated that he said now I wasn't there, but he said, Mr. President, you know, this is not simply about race or war. It's about access to education. And Lincoln created these land grant institutions, selling land in far-flung parts of the country, giving the money to the states, and they'd establish these institutions focused on agricultural and mechanical arts. And the purpose of that was to make certain that they become the people's universities, that they'd educate people and give them the ability to be able to carry on their functions in a democracy, but also to be able to have a practical education. And in many ways, I think that is something that we have lost. We've got to think about our research. We've got to think about our teaching. We've got to think about the kinds of ways that we connect with our students, with our general public. We've got to become very much engaged in building communities, building ideas, building creativity, but doing it in a way that is one that does create trust rather than create irritation or assuming that we know better than they do.
So when you, as presidents, how did you do this?
Well, how I did it, well, first of all, you know, I was president of 3 public universities, University of Colorado, which was a 4-campus system, then Ohio State, which is a land-grant university, and West Virginia University. But what I tried to do in the public universities is I would try to get out and meet with everyone. We were just talking about over here that one of the things that I would do is I would visit every county, every state in that, every county, every year in that state, just as a way to say that the university cared. I think that personalizing an institution is very important. If it is isolated, if it's arrogant, if it stands in a city and you expect people to come to the institution rather than the institution being involved. Even if you're a private institution and you're part of independent institutions, we have to make a concerted effort to have people believe in their hearts and minds that our institutions are making a difference in their lives. And that's only done by very personal, developed relationships.
Okay. So I wasn't going to ask this question, but it popped up since we were talking about your involvement as president. During lunch, we were talking about this. Has the job of a university president become simply impossible? Is it just something?
I just retired 4 months ago after 45 years. I think that it is very difficult right now, and a lot of it is because university presidents have made it difficult. I mean, I will take a look at, and this probably is something you were going to ask me about, but I thought that the conversations that were held before Congress with the 3 presidents from Harvard, Penn, and from MIT, what we saw there was the fact that these presidents had a hard time grabbing the moral high ground, and I think that that is the challenge that university presidents face right now. Is we have to start delineating what is the role of the institution, how we're going to act, and how we have expectations of other people in terms of civility, respect, and opportunities for free speech, but not taking other people's speech away. And we just didn't. So many university presidents have just failed to do that. This sounds a little strange, but the way that we search for university presidents now, the net result is the fact that you get the presidents who are appointed because they've offended the fewest number of people the longest period of time. And I think that is a part of the problem. They're pretty damn gray.
I see. I was thinking about various comments I've read about you over the time, and some of your comments.
Yeah, right.
I think
That's
Notre
the reason
Dame.
I've had to move so many
Notre
times.
Dame and their football team.
That's the reason I've had to move so many times. Thank you very much.
I thought it was a hoot myself,
Yeah.
but You can look it up. No one here from Notre Dame, I hope. There we go. All in good jest. All in good jest. So on a serious note, when the presidents were presenting before Congress, you'd mentioned it's a serious matter. So are you saying that their training or their background made them unable to defend higher education and defend the actions of the schools?
Because it was a serious
matter.
It was very serious, and I think it really put a knife in the heart of trust for the American people in many ways, those who watched that, because it was very, very difficult. It was difficult for me to watch it. I think that two things happened. One is the fact that they were over-prepared. They had a law firm prepare them, and the law firm basically told them, don't say anything that would be irritating to anyone. And so what they did is they irritated everyone. And then the second thing was the fact that I think that university presidents are very concerned about their internal constituencies. They hate these notions of votes of no confidence. They're afraid of being shunned. They're afraid of, in many ways, we're sort of like lemmings. We want to follow the latest trend or the latest notion of what is at the moment. I will give you one prime example right now, and that is that there are two different groups that are sort of vying at the moment. One is the resistance. No matter what this administration does, we're going to resist, even if it potentially has some possible good results. On the other hand, there are those, and I am a subscriber to this, is that we learn to live with the world that is given to us, and we learn to negotiate and move through that in order to preserve the quality of the institution. And I think that that's the kind of power struggle that we've got going on at the moment.
Okay. Trust is tied to funding. So obviously people, the governments fund a lot of both private and public institutions. And so what role do you see governments playing in the funding of institutions, particularly higher? This is obviously a hot button issue. I mean, we can take a look at some of the fines, Columbia and other schools have paid. So what's your view on that one?
Well, obviously in 1948, we came up with this notion that the federal government would provide money for research, and universities do the research and make it available to the public. And that was Vanderveer Bush who did that. And that has really been the results. We don't have a lot of federal labs. We don't have a variety of other things in that regard. So federal funding remains very important to the notion of one aspect of universities, which is to do creative and groundbreaking research. But also the funding issues have become very difficult. Let me just give you one example. When I became president of Ohio State, a large institution, 65,000 students, in 1990, about 65% of our budget came from the state. When I left in 2014, it was down to 8%. So that shows that there is a deterioration in terms of the support. And so, how do you make that up? You make it up through philanthropy. You keep raising tuition, a variety of other things, and particularly the public universities have really started to get a lot of backlash from the American public and from parents about what they're doing. At Brown, I had no trouble with tuition because I had 90,000 applicants for a few slots. So I would just wait for Harvard to raise its tuition, and I'd do ours $100 less. That was the only thing I thought about. That's not a very sound economic approach. But again, it shows that we have got to become more consistently engaged in understanding what students and parents are facing. 80% of the students in this country are educated in public institutions, and that is where we are having real problems in terms of the financial side of what we're doing right now.
So in terms of the federal government and recent attempts to have transparency in the costs and all, even if it's frustrating or maybe a little awkward or hard to figure out, you would support approaches like that on a federal level, or should it be a state, or how would you?
Well, I'm a great believer in federal support. I think that what the administration is doing is taking a bludgeon to a problem that is not necessarily bludgeon worth. Saying all of that, we have to understand that universities, in order to deal with the problems we're dealing with right now, we have to finally admit and look in the mirror. Asaf was saying this today about some of the various conversations going. We have to look in the mirror and discover why we are where we are and what the problems are. We tend to believe that because we are isolated, because we're arrogant, because we're smarter than the general public, we believe a variety of other things. We think that we are right and everyone else is wrong. We are discovering that they have something that we don't have, which is they have the power of the purse, and they're going to exert that unless we start having the right kind of conversations to determine how that relationship between the federal government and universities and colleges can really be mended.
So would you say that higher education has become too insular over time?
Oh, I think it's terribly insular. I mean, I've been a university president. I have lived in subsidized public housing for 45 years. I mean, you live on a university campus, you can become very isolated very quickly. And I think that is part of our problem, is we talk to each other. We live in a bubble, and we have conversations among each other, and that's how some of this kind of constructive dissonance has occurred, I believe.
So an interesting dynamic. So you're saying in one sense higher education is quite insular, but on the other hand it's very open, engaged with the outside world.
It should be.
Globalized.
It should be. That's the point. The point is the fact that we want our engagement to be the way we want to have it, rather than the way generally that maybe the folks in southern West Virginia or in southern South Carolina want to have it. We have to understand that we are servant leaders. We are not simply people who tell other people what they should think.
Okay, so let's talk, before we get into some of the issues of intellectual diversity and things like that, let's talk about administrative bloat, because one of the areas is a lot of academics and also the broader public is concerned. It's just universities have gotten so darn expensive. When you add up everything, it's just horribly expensive. Students are graduating with really unsustainable loans, and so the government will say, "We'll forgive your loans," and then they get people really upset because then it's on the taxpayers' dime, and then the government reverses it, and then other people get upset. And so it's because there's too many administrators rather than teachers. So you have a unique perch here to take a look at that issue. So do you think administrative bloat's an issue? What kind of reforms would you say are necessary to get universities in a better financial standing?
Yeah, first of all, I do think that we have too many people doing too few things. And I think a lot of that has been driven by regulations. There are kind of four levels of regulations that we have affecting universities. One is the federal regulations, which are really onerous. And I will say this, having experienced the last administration, and this is not meant as a political statement, but the Biden administration was so difficult to deal with. We had to hire lawyers to be able to even understand what they're saying. The second thing is we have state legislatures, which are very administratively overbearing. Then the third area of bloat that we have obviously is caused by the trustees. They want us to do this, they want us to do that, and so pretty soon we grow the administrative there. But the biggest impediment to this issue of academic growth is really self-imposed. You take a look at a faculty senate. By the time you go through 3 or 4 or 5 different iterations and speed bumps, we never do get to speed. In order to be able to get rid of a lot of the problems that we have in terms of getting things done within institutions, we've got to be transparent, we've got to be fact-based, and we've got to have a lot of speed. All three of those things are antithetical to the way that shared governance works in many ways. And so my point about shared governance is the fact that we have shared governance, we have academic freedom, we have no academic responsibility. We are not asking the questions as a university community about how do we make things work faster and more and become more agile. So you have these, just as another example, you have these, by the way, it's great to have my First Amendment back. I'm really enjoying it, if you can't tell. You take a look at these general education requirements. The truth of the matter is someone from X calls up and says, "I'll vote for yours if you'll vote for mine." And pretty soon, we have no general education. We just have a bunch of pablum out there. And so I think that the issue is that in much of the administrative bloat and much of the administrative costs in institutions are self-imposed, and we have to really start dealing with that very quickly.
All right, let's take a look at intellectual diversity and intellectual climate on campus. It's obviously been a big issue in the past few years. It's a growing issue, and how do universities balance academic freedom and intellectual exploration? How do they balance that academic freedom, intellectual, with the public's demand for practical outcomes? Let's do it. Let's take it a little easier until we get into some of the hot button issues.
Yeah.
So, intellectual freedom, practical outcomes.
Yeah, you're trying to get me trapped here because I'm
we're opening the door slowly.
Yeah,
we're
I know, and
then
I'm going to walk in, and then I'm going to have the door slam behind me. First of all, here is reality. Several surveys have showed recently 65% of the students in our country are afraid to say what they think. Try that one on for size. 65% of the faculty in our country, by poll, are afraid to say what they think. And it's probably 90% of the university administrators because their heads are on swivels all the time. So if we do not feel in a university community that we're really free to say what we want to, that we have a political catechism and we're going to live by that political catechism, and that if you don't do it the way that it is done in that department, you're going to have you're going to have retribution or you're going to be shunned. We have lost the reason for calling ourselves universities, and we have to get back at that. I think about particularly our young faculty members. By the way, there's three tyrannies, I believe, in universities. One is the tyranny of the department. The second is the tyranny of the college, and the third is the tyranny of old people running institutions. And I have a right to say that. So a young person comes to Ohio State or West Virginia or Vanderbilt or anywhere, and the reason they come is the fact that it has a wide-ranging set of intellectual requirements and opportunities. And a young philosopher decides she wants to do business and work with our medical center. And she creates all these great activities, and she's doing everything. And then some old white guy who's about 65 years of age says to her, "That's all well and good, but you're not going to get tenure unless you do it my way." We beat the creativity and the energy out of our young people in academic life. And so we have to make certain that we get into a much more open environment. And by the way, if you were asking me how I would organize universities, you haven't asked me that, but I'll tell you anyway.
How would you organize universities?
Thank you very much. I would get rid of colleges and departments and create centers, institutes, and working groups. And I would organize around ideas. That's the only way, I think, to ultimately get rid of some of these things. I tell an interesting story about the fact that when I was president of the University of Colorado, I created 2 freestanding tenure-granting institutes, but they embodied a lot of different people who could get in there to go into those. And a young guy, I read that he was leaving the University of Colorado. And I called him and I said, "Where are you going?" He said, I'm going to go to the 3M company." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do? Go make Post-its?" And he said, "Well, no, he's going to do research." I said, "Why don't you stay here?" And I put him into one of these centers, and he stayed at the institution. But when I was at Vanderbilt, he called me up, he came, visited me, invited me to go with him to Sweden because he'd won the Nobel Prize. But he'd won the Nobel Prize not in chemistry, but in physics, because he had been given the opportunity to move across the intellectual boundaries. That's what we have to do. That's what is going to make our institutions great again. We are too narrowly confined, and we therefore get dogmatic in what we're thinking or doing in those various departments or centers.
Okay, so taking a look at, we were taking a look at sort of boundaries, intellectual boundaries, and how we organize our universities. Let's talk about some ideological boundaries. Some, at least conservative critics, would argue that universities are too ideologically homogeneous. So just pause that for a moment. How do institutions work towards having genuine intellectual diversity?
Well, you know, unfortunately, it's being imposed from the outside, not very successfully. So the recent survey of the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Science, 3% of them identified as conservative. 3%. Now, I don't think that at a great institution like that 97% of the people are right and the others are wrong. I think it shows that we sort of hire our own, and we start developing what I would, there was a book called Tenured Radicals, and I think in some ways that's exactly what has happened. On the other hand, I was pointing out to some of my friends today that we were talking about at a big public university. I could go to my College of Arts and Science and I could never find a Republican, and I go to my medical school and never find a Democrat. So there is cross-pollination in many ways. But I think that the way if there's any way to correct this, is to move to what I'd call a neutral stand. My successor at Vanderbilt, Daniel Diermeyer, successor twice removed, has really taken a very strong stand on the fact that universities should be places of neutrality, and that also should take place in the classroom. And I think that I am not afraid of people's point of views as long as they do not bring it into the classroom. I'm afraid when they bring it into the classroom and when they intimidate their students or when they intimidate their other faculty members, that is where we have to try to find some line. Academic freedom, free speech, but I believe in free speech in the sense that probably at the University of Chicago's delineation is we need to have free speech with good ideas and bad ideas and irritating ideas and irrational ideas, but every idea needs to be welcome, and then we let the marketplace prevail.
So you were talking about centers. Let's see if I can put this together. You talked about the idea of centers, and you're talking about intellectual diversity, having a number of ideas. So if you take a look at something like the Hamilton Center idea, say at the University of Florida, is that a little bit of what you're talking about, where you have the center kind of over?
Yeah, no, those centers are created, self-imposed by the legislature. There's one in Ohio, the Chase Center. There's one in West Virginia called the Washington Center. There's some of these others. They're self-imposed. Well, you can imagine faculty think of those, the majority of faculty think about those as being governmentally imposed, and they are anathema to the notion of having an intellectual community. But unfortunately, we have caused that to happen. We have caused that to take place because we haven't listened carefully, and we have not created an environment in which a lot of ideas are welcome and understood, and people believe that they can have a free-flowing set of discussions. So the only way universities are either going to have to engage in self-correction, or the state and federal governments are going to engage in it for them, and we have no one to blame but ourselves in many ways.
Okay, so in terms of the intellectual interchange of ideas, we've looked at examples where individuals who may be more conservative or having different views may not feel welcome or able to express their ideas. But in some cases, we've seen examples where people fear for their lives or their safety. So after October 7th, we had demonstrations that were occurring at some institutions in New York City and elsewhere where, for instance, Jewish students felt actually physically intimidated because they represented ideas or people that were in disfavor. So when you say we do it to ourselves, and then the university leadership did not respond. So then, how, if you say universities have to reform within, how do you do it when they're not reforming? And then you have the bludgeoning of the federal government.
Yeah, so that's where we are right now. Is you have the external bludgeoning because we have refused to, at least in many instances, to reform internally. And we're talking about a wide swath. There are 4,500 colleges and universities in this country, and yeah, I've been president of about half of them sometimes. But anyway, so you can't sweep everyone in, but you do know that there is a general trend that has happened here, and that's the trust factor, a variety of other things. So the question you're asking, of course, is how do we engage in self-correction if governments are imposing from the outside, which of course is something that we really do not want to have, and certainly something that I do not applaud. But I think that also we have to be very clear as university administrators to draw the line. For example, at Columbia. Columbia is my university. I have 2 degrees from Columbia, but when you have and I was there during the Mark Rudd days, by the way. So I saw offices being taken over. I've had my own office taken over. And, it shows sometimes how funny these things are. I came in, these kids had taken over my office. I yelled at them. I brought out a foghorn and said, "Get the hell out of here!" And they left timidly. So maybe that's maybe that's what you need to do, is do something like that. So but I think that what happened is that the minute that you allow things to occur on campus in which your freedom is taking away other people's freedom and fear, then that is the line that university administrators need to draw as absolutely unacceptable.
But they haven't.
And they haven't, and so therefore we have to change university leadership, or we have to change the culture in some way, or we have to impose it from the outside. I mean, look, I think, $200 million for Columbia, but at least they've gotten a little bit of religion, as a matter of fact. But remember what I said. There's a lot of people who are engaged in resistance. As a university president, I know I would come up with these grand statements and things we were going to do, and there's always the fourth estate, and they'd say, we'll do what he wants us to do, but we'll really outlast him. And this is sort of what is happening right now. We're going to outlast this administration. The truth of the matter is, this administration will outlast higher education unless we're very careful, because they're going to change things fundamentally unless we start listening carefully.
So we're about to turn it over for questions from the audience, so be queuing up your questions inside. So when we take a look at cause and effect, so do you think the Trump administration and some of the changes that are going on in higher education there's some underlying issues that are going on, or underlying concerns that's being expressed through the administration that will outlast the current administration, that will continue?
I think that higher education is fundamentally changing right now, and I'm not certain if I can predict exactly what it's going to be like, but it's a different set of dynamics that we've got going on that will outlast this administration and will start to impose themselves in different ways. A lot of it is because of the fact that universities and colleges are really controlled in large measure by the states, or they're controlled by their donors and by their boards. And you saw that at Penn, you saw that at MIT, a variety of other places. And so this kind of conversation is taking place, is not simply taking place in the Department of Education, soon to disappear, but it's taking place in boardrooms and in conversations among faculty and friends of institutions all across this country.
So last question before we open it up. Take a look at now and the discourse in higher education, and go back 2 years.
2 years?
2 years. Okay. And
to October 7th.
2 years. Before October, we'll go to October 6th, and take a look at the discourse in higher education then and now. What are the major changes you see?
Well, I think it's become much more toxic. I think it, and I, You know, I was just thinking the other day that, so we had this ceasefire. This to me was just a profound example. We had this ceasefire, and I've had so many people and watched them and listened to them that they said, we've got to have a ceasefire, and they're running into the streets, they're talking about all of this, and then when the ceasefire occurred, crickets. I really believe that there is a broad swath, and by the way, I want all of you to know I am a devout Mormon. That's the reason I don't drink coffee and tea, but I love Diet Coke. I think that we have to fundamentally understand that there is a broad swath of people in these movements that it's not about Palestine so much as it is anti-Semitic. I really do believe that.